Howdy. This video is our second in a three-part sequence about coping with seller's remorse. Now, the last video that we posted was about a situation where the seller has their remorse before the seller has gone under contract. The seller is rejecting, in the last one, a full price offer. Now we're talking about another variation on this. The seller has remorse, but after the seller has signed a contract with this buyer. So just putting some facts on it. A deal goes under contract, let's say on day 0, and the transaction is supposed to close, let's say on day 40, and we're 10 days away from closing and everything's been going along smoothly. The buyer's due diligence has gone smoothly. Everything looks great. The closer, the title company, sends out documents to the seller to sign, and then all of a sudden you get a call or an email back from the seller. I feel terrible about this, but I guess I should have done a better job in checking in with my spouse. And when I presented the documents to him or to her to sign and close, I got an earful and was told that if I close on the sale of this property, my marriage is going to be over, so we're not closing. I know this puts you in a tough bind, is what the seller says to you. I realize the feces is hitting the fan. I'm not closing. All right, what do you do in situations like that? So let me give you a few concepts, key concepps. Number 1, there may not be a bad person in this story. In other words, the reason I gave you for the seller not closing in this, at least the stated reason in this fact pattern, was that the seller did not check in with the spouse or their partner, or their other partners in the sale of the property. So arguably, that person is at fault for not doing it. But there are other things that come up in people's lives, like a married couple owns the property, or just a couple owns the property, and one of them dies, and the reason to move completely changes, or the reason that they're moving is to buy a replacement property some other place, and that property is destroyed in a fire, or the reason they're moving is to be with the grandkids, and there's a miscarriage and there aren't any grandkids to move to. So the first concept is to have humility. There may not be any bad person in this story. Okay, the next thing is that in the situation I described, assuming that there are no contingencies in the contract that would excuse the seller from performing, for example, the contract does not have a contingency. Your seller's contract to sell does not have some contingency making your seller's obligation to close contingent upon finding a replacement property. Assuming there are no contingencies like that in the contract, your client still has leverage. And the reason your client still has leverage is, life is not like a hockey game or a basketball game where there's referees, they're skating around with us. And if we breach a contract, they throw a flag or blow a whistle and then throw us in the penalty box. That's not the way life is. The buyers, in order to enforce the contract, have to file a lawsuit, and not all buyers want to do that. So even though it looks bleak for your client still, your seller client might have leverage. Another factor is, it is possible that the buyer has their own reasons to bail, or at least not bail, but might not be enthusiastic enough to take the fight to the seller. Another general theme in these situations is that you always have a dilemma, or not always, you often have a dilemma between your duty to be transparent with the other side, because generally you have an obligation to let the buyer's side know about adverse material facts as you are aware of them, and your seller's intention to breach the contract is an adverse material fact that the buyer needs to know about. But on the other hand, if you're completely, another thing is some buyers might be moved by a hard luck story from your seller. But the problem with being transparent is that it may make it harder for your seller to get out of the deal. And who resolves those dilemmas? Not you. Not you. If your seller needs professional advice about that, they need a lawyer. And by the way, that's not a sales pitch. Do not send them to me. Because if you have a client who is breaching the deal, you want the deal to close. I want to help you get that deal to the closing table. It would be a conflict of interest for me to represent your seller who doesn't want to close. Last general concept, and this is the biggest one. Your seller's problems are not your problems here. Now, I realize you do have problems here. You may be counting on getting that commission, and you not getting that commission may cause big problems. I agree that the money for your commission may already have been spent. I agree this creates a problem for you, but that's why I said it like I did. Your seller's problems, that your seller might get sued for breaching the contract, are not your problems. In these situations, it's also useful to have an awareness that some buyers, in a flat market, in a market where interest rates are going down, the buyer might not have big damages. But in the market in which I'm recording this, and I'm recording this in May of 2022, we have, I'm not sure if it's the perfect storm or not, but we have a lot of conditions that suggest that the buyers will have big damages. In a market where interest rates are increasing, if the buyer has to go back out to the market and buy another property and get a new loan to buy that replacement property, that they might be paying interest rates that are significantly higher than in the transaction where the seller is defaulting. The buyer could have big financial damages by having to go back out to the market. If the market value of the property is appreciating, then the buyer may lose what we call the benefit of the bargain. In order to buy the equivalent replacement home, it might cost that buyer tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Other more mundane damages, perhaps not as big damages, but the buyer might be made homeless for a while, and that can be very expensive. And then in some situations, in investment situations, the buyer can have a lot of tax pain. The buyer is counting on closing on the property that you have listed as the replacement transaction in a Section 1031 exchange. The buyer could have huge damages. What do you do in these situations? It's not your problem. You are not licensed as a deal breaker. You are licensed as a deal maker. Have a trail of advising the seller to talk to their own legal counsel. Do not be their lawyer. Do not enable their breach of the contract. Make your client and their lawyer do the heavy lifting. And don't keep it silent from the other side for more than a couple days. And a couple days might be too long if the seller tells you this 3 days prior to closing. You do have an obligation to tell the other side about adverse material facts. And if the seller tells you this 3 weeks before closing, waiting 3-4 days to give the seller a chance to talk to a lawyer and understand how bleak their situation might be okay. If the closing is supposed to be in 4 days, waiting 3 days to tell the buyer isn't a good deal. Figure out how to balance those dilemmas by talking to your attorney. That's all I got to say. Thanks for watching. Remember, we live in a complex world. Be careful out there.